the Grand Vitara is back. And it's back in an all-new avatar with some really interesting powertrain options. So yes, there is a regular mild hybrid variant, but it also gets the option of all-wheel drive. Then there's a separate strong hybrid variant which promises best-in-class fuel efficiency. So how does it drive in the real world? Well, first we'll take the Grand Vitara out and test out the off-road capabilities. We'll be really putting that all-grip, all-wheel drive system to the test. Then we'll take both the mild hybrid and the strong hybrid variants out for a drive to find out how they fare in the real world. Hi, I'm Karan Singh, you're watching AutoX, and this is our first drive of the brand new Grand Vitara. So we're starting off the drive of the Maruti Suzuki Grand Vitara here on an off-road course to demonstrate how good this all-grip, all-wheel drive system is. So this is of course the 1.5 litre mild hybrid variant with the 5-speed manual, which is the only variant you can get the all-wheel drive system in. Now we've already done the first obstacle. That was sort of a test to see the approach and departure angle. You go down a 25-degree decline, then you stop, and then you come up a similar incline. And the Grand Vitara had no problems dealing with it whatsoever. I don't even think the 4-wheel drive system really had to engage. Now, we are at the second obstacle. Now, this is to demonstrate the hill hold assist. So it's quite a steep incline. It actually gets steeper at the top. We stop there, and hopefully as soon as I let off the brake, the car should hold for 3 seconds. So let's try that out. We approach slowly and brake. So full brake. Now my foot is off the brake and holding the steering now. But my foot is off the brake. Now if I leave it off the brake, it'll be 1, 2, 3, and then yes, the car does roll back. But then it does give you enough time to engage the clutch and then go on a steep incline. So we're going to go up the incline fully now. And now we'll stop. So now we put the car into snow mode, then we press lock, and then we can engage the hill descent control. So on the other side now is a steep descent, and I'm going to go down it and not use the brakes at all. So I'm going to go, my foot is off the brake. I promise you it's off the brake, and the cars control the descent very well. It's actually not a very jerky brake application either. Quite impressed with it initially. Now the third obstacle is actually a rather tough one. It's articulation. So basically, like any other articulation course, you have ditches on either side, and then as you go further, the ditches get deeper and deeper and sort of gets tougher for the car. So we can go now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Slowly.
So we'll go slow. Okay. So it's on auto now. Okay, so into the first ditch. No problems. Second one. What can happen like this is that the 4-wheel drive system takes a second, like any other 4-wheel drive system, to sort of spin its wheels and figure out which wheel has the most amount of traction. That's not the 4-wheel drive system not working. In fact, it's a sign of the system working. So now the wheels are spinning and it's starting to figure out which wheel has traction, and there you go. So now we can proceed further. So now our third obstacle, or the fourth obstacle actually, is sort of like a slush pit, which will help us demonstrate the different 4-wheel drive settings that the Grand Vitara has. Snow basically dulls down the throttle response and will make the electronics as sensitive as possible. So we're in the slush pit now. The car is catching grip. You can feel the traction control system working, and yes, it does catch grip quite well. And in the snow, the throttle response is actually quite dull, so it doesn't let the revs climb, and make sure that you have grip all the time. Now we're into sport. Now sport is not designed for slush obviously, but now the throttle responses are a lot sharper, the revs are climbing a lot more, but then the car also has less grip. So you are sort of spinning your wheels constantly. So sport is definitely not designed for these really slippery surfaces. We'll also now put it into snow and lock, which is probably the ideal setting for this, it gives you the throttle response, but it also gives you the grip that you need to get through a situation like this. So as you can probably hear, the revs are climbing, but it is also getting grip. That's quite good, honestly. So this is quite a slushy pit, and the Grand Vitara has had no problems whatsoever. It's never been bogged down. So quite a good performance from the Grand Vitara. Okay, so now one of the final obstacles is a rock course. So we'll put it in auto for that, correct? And this is actually not a very tough obstacle compared to the others. But what you can feel is sort of the ride quality of the Grand Vitara over such a tough surface. This is not testing out the ground clearance really. There's not very sharp rocks. But even with the car on really rough rocks, there's not too much roll and it doesn't feel very unsettled. Yes, you do move about obviously, but it's actually soaking it up quite well. So yeah, that was a fairly easy obstacle, but quite impressive to see Grand Vitara, which is a car that's mainly meant, an SUV that's mainly meant for the city, to be able to tackle all this with ease. Now the final obstacle, the final boss, is a side incline. So we go into snow and lock for this. So basically it's two pits, long pits, deep pits, and so the first one is on the right side, so the car tilts fully to the right, and then there's a switch over and the car goes on to the left. At the switch over, the four-wheel drive system has to figure out which wheel has the most traction, so that's where the test is. So let's go for this. So we're going into the pit now. Okay. It's actually surprising how well the car deals with it. So now we're at the switch over point. As you can probably hear, the four-wheel drive system is figuring out which wheel has the most traction, and it's done that successfully. So those noises you hear aren't bad. They're sort of the four-wheel drive system figuring out which wheel has the most traction. As you can see, it is quite a steep decline on one side. But yes, that was the last obstacle, and it's quite cool to see the Grand Vitara do all of this with fairly good ease. I keep saying final, but there's one last obstacle. Now these are basically ice slabs put on the track, and for this we'll engage snow mode and sort of let the car do its thing. So it's not a very steep incline, but the fact is that one side of the car will be on snow, on ice slabs, very, very slippery ice slabs, and one side has traction. So the four-wheel drive system has to basically figure out which wheels have traction. It takes a bit of a second, and then it's fairly smooth getting up. So go up it now, and now go. So no problems whatsoever. It took a second, but pretty much no time. So that was the last obstacle. It's actually quite nice to see how well this all-grip, all-wheel drive system functions out in the real world. Okay, so now we are on the road. We've left the off-road bits behind and we are driving the strong hybrid variant of the Grand Vitara. What is the strong hybrid? So this is a 1.5 litre engine. It's not the same 1.5 litre engine as the mild hybrid. It's a little bit confusing, so bear with me. But yes, it's a completely different 1.5 litre engine from that. It's also connected to e-motors and a full proper battery system. The total system output for the strong hybrid variant is 113 bhp. However, there's no exact total torque figure for this variant. So that brings me on to the performance aspect of the Grand Vitara strong hybrid. Now at low ends, the performance is fantastic actually. The throttle response is great because that electric motor is filling in that torque and you have really good instantaneous throttle response. So getting up to speed from low speeds, making those small quick city overtakes is fantastic on the Grand Vitara. It really picks up pace really well. On the higher side, when you get to triple digit speeds, it's a little bit sluggish. So when you cross 90-95 kmph, progress becomes really slow. So getting from 0 to 60 takes very less time. But then after 90-95, it can do it. There's no nothing stopping it. So it can even get up to 120 fairly easily. but yeah, it is a little bit slow. So overall, this 1.5 litre strong hybrid engine is at its strength in the city at low speeds. This engine is really fuel efficient. You can get above 20 kmpl fairly easily without even really trying. It can also do very short trips on electric mode only. In fact, this 1.5 litre strong hybrid engine starts off in EV mode. So your starting off is actually silent, and then when you really need it, the engine then kicks in. EV mode isn't exactly speed dependent, it's more load dependent. So right now I'm at 30. If I gradually build up the speed, it continues into EV mode. Then if I floor the throttle, yes, the engine kicks in, and the transition from electric to the engine is actually fairly smooth. You don't really notice it too much. Only when you mash the throttle, you can hear it quite loudly, thanks to that eCVT gearbox. Now in terms of drive modes, you do have an electric only drive mode, but the system automatically, even like in the auto drive mode, it can disengage from EV when it senses that you need a little bit more power. Then you have an eco and power drive mode, which is pretty self-explanatory. It just basically dulls the throttle response. On the gearbox side, you also have a B mode that's right below the regular drive. Now the B mode is basically, it gives you a little bit more regen and more aggressively charges up the battery. So if you are looking to do more electric miles, the B mode is where you should be sticking your gearbox. Also, on the strong hybrid variant, you get a full digital instrument cluster, and it really shows you a nice display of your energy flow, which is actually, you know, pretty informative. It shows you if the battery is getting recharged or whatever. And the speed layout is also really nice. It's bright, it's colorful. I really like how they've executed the digital instrument cluster. This strong hybrid variant also gets a head-up display. I'm not a big fan of the head-up display personally. It's not something that's very useful to me. I like the rear view camera, but it is quite low resolution. It is still useful, but to be honest, it is low resolution in the world where, you know, we are seeing really crisp rear view cameras. This is quite subpar compared to those. Now, other changes on this strong hybrid variant versus the mild hybrid is the fact that you do get a wireless charger here. You also get ventilated seats on the strong hybrid variant, which sort of keeps you really cool in the summer days. But one thing that really is a bit of a miss is this sunroof shade. So this net is quite thin and it's light colored. So it's now afternoon, so the sun is right above our heads. You can feel it in the cabin. It's not that the cabin gets hot per se, but you can feel that the higher end of the cabin is heated up. So that is something to note. Now that said, the sunroof is actually fantastic. So this is a dual pane sunroof. A lot of sunroofs today are dual pane sunroof, but this actually uses that dual pane to its advantage. So you can really open up the sunroof completely. Now this might be first in segment. So in terms of glass area, it might be similar to its rivals, but in terms of the area that you can open up, this is huge. It goes all the way back, and that's actually really nice. Okay, so now we'll hop into the 1.5 litre mild hybrid variant, where we'll talk about the ride quality, we'll talk about the features, and we'll talk about how, of course, that 1.5 litre mild hybrid drives. So let's get right into that. This is the 1.5 litre mild hybrid engine. It's the same engine gearbox combination as we drove on the off-road track, but this is the two-wheel drive variant. So the 1.5 litre mild hybrid engine can be had either with a 5-speed manual that we're driving right now, or a 6-speed automatic, and only with the manual can you have the option of all-wheel drive. But like I said, this is the two-wheel drive manual variant, and probably this will be one of the most popular variants in the Grand Vitara range. Of course, probably the most popular variant will be the 1.5 mild hybrid with the automatic gearbox, but this manual is also a really nice gearbox. So like we've seen with Maruti gearboxes in the past, it's a very nice, smooth gearbox. The engine itself is refined. Now this is in the same state of tune as it is in the Brezza. So that means the 1.5 litre mild hybrid variant makes 101 bhp and 137 Nm of torque. So it's not a very peppy engine, especially in a car that's a little bit larger, a little bit heavier than the Brezza. So it doesn't feel underpowered as such, but you do have to wring its neck if you really want to get some power out of it. That said, refinement levels are really good. The engine is butter smooth. This being a 4-cylinder, there's none of that rough 3-cylinder idles. So all of that is really good. It is very refined. And on the highway, it can get up to speed. But again, this is something that we faced with the Brezza. I feel a 6th gear on the manual would have been welcome. For example, we're cruising at 90 right now, and the car is just sitting above 2,500 RPM. So it does get a little bit noisy. It doesn't mean that the engine is stressed itself, but a 6th gear would have been welcome. Now in terms of ride quality, the Grand Vitara is actually very, very good. We've seen this with Maruti cars in the past, the Brezza, the Baleno, they've all had great ride quality, and the Grand Vitara is actually probably even better than those two. So it absorbs bumps really, really well, isolates you from the road. There is a little bit of road noise, a little bit of wind noise, but the ride quality is fantastic. You can hit bumps and potholes really hard, and the Grand Vitara never feels unsettled at all. Yes, if you do hit a very sharp pothole, there is a thud in the cabin, so it's not a true blue SUV in that regard. But overall, the ride quality is fantastic. Even in terms of handling, this 1.5 litre mild hybrid engine is a little bit lighter because it doesn't have to carry around battery packs. So it does feel lighter on its feet as well. Even in terms of handling, you don't feel a lot of weight that you're lugging around. So even in terms of overall performance, this 1.5 litre mild hybrid is actually a little better suited for highway cruising, because after 85-90 kilometers per hour, the strong hybrid seems a little bit dead, and it is a little bit heavier than this engine. So if you are looking to do a lot of highway cruising, a lot of outstation driving, this 1.5 litre mild hybrid should be the choice in the Grand Vitara range. Of course, if you do plan to take your Grand Vitara off-road or handle slushy patches, and if you will be encountering very slippery terrain very often, then of course the 1.5 litre with the manual and the all-wheel drive makes the most sense. Okay, so now that we're on the road, let's talk a little bit about the interior of the Grand Vitara. Now, one thing I must point out is that a lot of the switchgear here is shared with other Maruti cars, which sort of makes the Grand Vitara feel not that revolutionary of a product. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that if you are coming from a different Maruti and switching to the Grand Vitara, which is possible, you won't feel that this cabin is very different to what you've already been used to. So for example, this steering wheel, yes, it is wrapped in really nice leather, probably better leather than we've seen on the Baleno and the Brezza, but the steering itself is the same as the Baleno and the Brezza. Even the switches, everything is the same. Even the controls for the 360-degree camera, the head-up display, all of that is exactly lifted from the Baleno and the Brezza. And that's something you might not want when you're spending 18-19 lakh rupees on a Grand Vitara. So that's something to note. Aside from that, the features are fairly good. So on the strong hybrid top-end variant, you also get ventilated seats. There's obviously Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and this is on a really nice, bright infotainment screen. It's high up in your line of sight, so you don't really need to look down to view it. And the touch screen is also fairly responsive. Another thing is that the Android Auto navigation prompts from Google Maps, they come into your MID here, which is nice to see. A lot of cars with full digital instrument clusters are not able to have that sync. So it's nice to see that you get your navigation inputs over here. So it's not a full map, but only, let's say you have to take a right, it tells you have to take a right in 300 meters. So that's nice to see. The 360-degree camera quality is actually pretty bad. It's strange because the camera on the Brezza and the Baleno is actually fairly good, but the camera here is just very low res, and it's not, of course the rear view camera is useful because you can see what you're backing up into, but the 360-degree camera itself, because that low resolution and that really warped final image, it's not really that useful. It's more of a gimmick. Even the head-up display, I don't find too much use for it because that glass sort of comes into your line of sight, but I can see that some people might use it. One of my favorite bits about the interior of the Grand Vitara is actually these seats. They are very supportive. On the Baleno and the Brezza, we faced that the seats lack a lot of side support, and even in terms of the overall cushioning, they're very soft. This is nice, firm, has lots of support, so you can probably do very long distances in these seats and not really complain too much. Overall, cabin quality is also good. Yes, there are scratchy plastics up top, but the cabin does feel built to last. I like this strip of sort of a faux leather texture going across the dash. I think it looks nice and it also does feel nice. So it's not proper leather, but it does feel high quality. Even the layout here is nice. Yes, like I said, the switchgear is from other Maruti cars, but the layout itself is nice. So the Grand Vitara's cabin actually feels good. Probably not as premium as something like the Seltos or the Creta, but still not that far off. The Grand Vitara also gets a panoramic sunroof. It's the first Maruti to get a panoramic sunroof, and of course that really lightens up and brightens up the cabin. In terms of rear seat space, it's fairly good. I do have enough knee room. I'm 5'11". If I sit behind myself with the driver's seat adjusted to my driving position, the knee room is fairly good. Headroom is also not a concern at all. And even the seats at the back are very supportive. So people at the back should also be fairly comfortable. And at the back, you also get a Type C port, a Type A port, and 2 AC vents. Overall then, the Grand Vitara is actually quite an interesting product. It's probably the first time Maruti Suzuki is trying to play the upper hand on pure mechanicals. Yes, it doesn't have a diesel engine option, but the Grand Vitara alongside the Toyota Hyryder is the only one in the segment to offer a proper strong hybrid powertrain. And these two SUVs are also the only ones to offer all-wheel drive, albeit with that mild hybrid engine. Now that said, it does lack some of the premiumness of its rivals, which could be a deal breaker for a lot of buyers. There's no getting away from the fact that it does not feel as premium as some of the other competitors. But that said, it does claw back with the reliability and the low cost of ownership that so many of us associate with owning a Maruti, and that could make it a hot seller. ठीक है? Safety करना है?